Welcome to Empathy Stories, where the simplest acts of kindness ignite the most profound transformations. Today, we bring you the heartfelt journey of William, a wealthy CEO, and Grace, a homeless mother, whose lives intertwine unexpectedly in a tale of compassion, redemption, and the power of love. Stay with us for this moving story. Rain poured relentlessly over New York City. The kind of storm that turned bustling streets into rivers of shimmering reflections and tested even the most patient pedestrians. Inside his sleek black car, William Grant barely noticed the downpour. His focus remained on the presentation ahead, a pitch that could secure his corporation's dominance in the financial world. His movements were calculated, his mind a fortress of logic and precision. For William, the demands of his position as CEO of one of the country's largest financial firms left little room for sentimentality. But fate has a curious way of interrupting even the most regimented lives. As his car came to a stop at a red light, William's gaze drifted to the corner of the sidewalk. Amid the sea of umbrellas and hurried commuters, a figure stood out, a young woman, drenched to the bone, clutching a baby in her arms. She wore an old, threadbare coat that did little to shield her from the storm. The baby, wrapped tightly against her chest, whimpered softly, his cries barely audible over the roar of the rain. The woman's face, pale and lined with exhaustion, bore an expression of quiet determination. In her trembling hands, she held a small cardboard sign with uneven, hastily scrawled letters. "Please help. We need food and shelter." William stared at her through the rain-streaked window, an unusual sensation stirring within him. He told himself to focus on the light that was about to change, on the demands of his carefully planned day. But as the seconds ticked by, something deeper gnawed at him, a faint memory from long ago. He remembered cold nights on the streets, struggling to survive before he had built his empire. He had buried those memories beneath years of success and affluence. Yet this woman, standing there with her child, brought them rushing back. When the light turned green, William found himself hesitating. The rational part of his mind told him to drive on. After all, the city was full of people in need, and he couldn't possibly help them all. But something about her resolve despite the hopelessness of her situation, the way she shielded the baby from the rain with her own body, kept him rooted in place. Before he could fully rationalize his decision, he rolled down the window. "Get in," he said, his voice firm but laced with an uncharacteristic softness. The woman hesitated, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and disbelief. She took a step closer, cradling the baby protectively. I don't want to trouble you," she stammered, her voice almost lost in the rain. "You're not troubling me," William replied, gesturing toward the back seat. "Just get in before you both freeze." Still uncertain, the woman finally nodded and climbed into the car, her movements cautious and wary. As she settled into the back seat, William turned up the heater, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. She was soaked through, her hands trembling as she adjusted the baby's blanket. Yet, despite her evident exhaustion, there was a quiet dignity about her, a pride that kept her from pleading or complaining. "What's your name?" he asked after a moment. "Grace," she said softly. "And this is Lucy." William nodded, offering a faint smile. "I'm William." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Grace seemed too overwhelmed to speak, and William found himself uncharacteristically reflective. He couldn't quite explain why he had stopped for her. It wasn't pity. He had seen plenty of people down on their luck before. No, it was something deeper. Something about Grace that reminded him of the person he used to be before wealth and power had consumed his every waking moment. As they drove through the rain-soaked streets, William made an impulsive decision. Instead of heading to the airport, he directed the car toward his mansion on the outskirts of the city. It was a sprawling, modern estate with glass walls and manicured gardens, beautiful but lifeless. William rarely spent time there, and when he did, the house felt more like a museum than a home. Today, however, he saw it differently. For the first time, it seemed to hold the potential to be something more than just an empty shell. When they arrived, Grace's eyes widened in disbelief. She clutched Lucy closer, as though the sight of such grandeur was too overwhelming to process. William parked the car and stepped out, opening the door for her. "You can stay here," he said, handing her a silver key. "At least until I get back tomorrow." Grace's hands trembled as she accepted the key. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is more than I could have ever imagined." "There's no need to thank me," William replied, his tone brusque, almost as though he were embarrassed by his own generosity. "Just take care of yourself and the baby." With that, he turned and walked back to his car. Not looking back, Grace watched him go, still struggling to comprehend what had just happened. For months, she had been met with nothing but indifference and rejection. To have someone show her kindness, let alone a man of William's stature, felt like a miracle as she stepped into the mansion. The warmth and luxury enveloped her like a protective cocoon. The crystal chandeliers, plush furniture, and towering windows were a world apart from the streets she had called home. Holding Lucy close, Grace allowed herself a rare moment of relief. For tonight, at least, she and her daughter were safe. The following day, William returned to the mansion earlier than planned. His business trip had been postponed, leaving him with a rare moment of unstructured time. As he pulled into the driveway, a strange warmth greeted him. The house, once cold and sterile, seemed to radiate a quiet energy. It wasn't until he stepped inside and heard the sound of faint laughter, a baby's soft giggle, that he realized why. Drawn by the sound, William walked toward the guest rooms. Through a slightly open door, he saw Grace kneeling on the floor, playing with Lucy. A stuffed bear danced in her hands, eliciting peals of laughter from the baby, whose tiny hands reached out in delight. Grace's face was lit with pure joy, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. For a few seconds, William stood there, captivated by the simplicity of the moment. It was a sight unlike anything he had ever witnessed in his home. For years, his mansion had been a fortress of solitude, its halls echoing only with the sounds of his purposeful strides and the distant hum of staff going about their duties. Now, the room was filled with life, with warmth, a stark contrast to the carefully curated emptiness he had grown accustomed to. Grace looked up and noticed him. Embarrassment flickered across her face as she quickly put the bear down and scooped Lucy into her arms. "I didn't expect you back so soon," she said, her voice tinged with nervousness. William smiled faintly and stepped into the room. "You don't have to stop on my account," he said, his tone softer than he intended. "She seems happy." Lucy, unaware of the tension in the room, reached out to William with curious eyes. Hesitating only for a moment, he extended his hand, and the baby grasped his finger with surprising strength. Her touch was gentle, and her laugh came again, a sound that stirred something deep within him. For a man who had spent his life valuing control and efficiency, this moment felt oddly grounding. Grace watched the interaction with cautious gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything. This has meant more to me than I can ever explain." William nodded, but before he could respond, a voice interrupted them. "William," came the sharp, unmistakable tone of Victoria Harper. She stood in the doorway, her perfectly tailored dress and immaculate appearance contrasting starkly with Grace's simple attire. Victoria's gaze swept over the room, landing on Grace and Lucy with thinly veiled disdain. "I didn't realize you had guests," she said, her smile cold and calculated. Victoria had been a figure in William's life for years, part rival, part confidante, and, at one point, a potential partner, ambitious and shrewd. She had always maintained a firm grip on her position in William's orbit. Seeing Grace and Lucy now, a flash of jealousy crossed her face, though she quickly masked it with feigned politeness. "This is Grace and her daughter, Lucy," William said, his tone neutral. "They're staying here temporarily." Victoria raised an eyebrow, her smile tightening. "How charitable of you," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Grace, sensing the hostility beneath Victoria's words, shifted uncomfortably. She held Lucy closer, her protective instincts kicking in. "I'll give you some privacy," she said softly, retreating with Lucy before William could object. As soon as Grace left the room, Victoria turned to William, her expression hardening. "What are you doing?" "William," she demanded, "bringing a stranger into your home like this? Do you even know who she is?" "She's a mother in need of help," William replied, his patience already wearing thin. "That's all you need to know." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Do you really think it's that simple? She could be taking advantage of you. People like her." She stopped short, her tone loaded with insinuation. "People like her?" William repeated, his voice cold. "Careful." Victoria, undeterred, she pressed on. "You've worked too hard to build your reputation. William, letting someone like her into your life, it's risky. You don't know her intentions." Though William outwardly dismissed Victoria's accusations, her words planted a seed of doubt. He prided himself on being a man of logic and caution, and Victoria's warning played on his instincts to protect his carefully constructed world. That evening, as he passed by the guest room, William hesitated. He saw Grace sitting on the bed, feeding Lucy with a tenderness that was both calming and heartbreaking. The sight should have reassured him. Yet Victoria's words lingered. What if she was right? What if Grace wasn't as innocent as she seemed? The following day, unable to shake the doubt, William hired a private investigator to look into Grace's past. The decision gnawed at him, filling him with guilt. But he told himself it was necessary. He needed clarity, not only for his own peace of mind, but to ensure Lucy's safety. Or so he justified. When the report arrived days later, William opened it with a mix of trepidation and urgency. As he read, the truth unfolded before him. Grace's story was one of hardship and resilience, far from the manipulation Victoria had implied. She had been a promising medical student, dedicated and compassionate, until a series of tragedies derailed her life. The loss of her parents, an abusive relationship, and the birth of Lucy had left her penniless and struggling to survive. The weight of her struggles, juxtaposed with her unwavering determination to protect her child, filled William with a deep sense of remorse. He had doubted her integrity, allowed Victoria's venomous words to cloud his judgment. Grace wasn't taking advantage of him. She was surviving with dignity against all odds. By the time William finished reading, his guilt was almost unbearable. He had not only misjudged Grace, but had likely hurt her in ways she wouldn't admit. He needed to make amends, not out of obligation, but because he now saw her for who she truly was, a woman of remarkable strength and character. The report lay open on William's desk, but he couldn't bring himself to read it again. Each line replayed in his mind: Grace's struggles, the loss of her family, the betrayal by someone she had trusted, and the relentless battle to keep Lucy safe despite having nowhere to turn. Every word was a reminder of how profoundly he had misjudged her. William leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The weight of his mistake bore down on him. Grace had never sought his charity. She had accepted his help with quiet humility and gratitude, asking for nothing more than a moment of peace. Yet he had allowed his doubts and Victoria's cutting words to overshadow her truth. And now, she was gone. The house felt emptier than ever. Every room echoed with the absence of laughter, of life. William had always thrived in silence, but now it unnerved him. He thought of Lucy's bright eyes and infectious giggle, of the way she had held his finger with unwavering trust. He thought of Grace, her calm strength and the tenderness she showed her daughter despite carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. For the first time in years, William realized how barren his life had been, how much it lacked warmth, connection, and meaning. He made his decision that night. He couldn't let Grace disappear, not without apologizing, not without trying to make things right. He hired the investigator again, this time to find Grace and Lucy. Days of anxious waiting followed, each moment filled with a mixture of hope and fear. What if she refused to see him? What if it was too late to mend the damage he had done? When the investigator finally returned with an address, William felt both relief and trepidation. He drove himself to the small apartment building on the outskirts of the city. It was a stark contrast to his mansion, weathered, cramped, and unremarkable, but it was clearly a refuge for Grace. He hesitated outside the door, his heart pounding. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say. But now, standing here, every word felt inadequate. He knocked. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Grace stood in the doorway. Lucy balanced on her hip. Her expression was a mixture of surprise and caution, and William felt a pang of regret at the guarded look in her eyes. "Grace," he began, his voice soft but firm. "Please, I know I'm the last person you expected or wanted to see, but I need to talk to you, just for a moment." Grace didn't respond immediately, but her silence wasn't unkind. She glanced at Lucy, who was studying William with wide, curious eyes. Before stepping aside to let him in, the apartment was modest but tidy, a testament to Grace's resilience and determination. William felt out of place in his tailored suit, his polished shoes seeming almost offensive against the worn but clean floors. He took a deep breath and met Grace's gaze. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for doubting you, for letting someone else's words cloud my judgment. I made a terrible mistake, and I can't express how sorry I am." Grace's expression softened, but her guard remained. "Why did you come here, William?" she asked quietly. "To clear your conscience?" "No," he said quickly, his voice thick with emotion. "I came because I realized something the moment you and Lucy left. You brought something into my life that I didn't even know I was missing: warmth, kindness, humanity. The truth is, you and Lucy showed me what truly matters. And I want to ask if you'll give me a chance to make things right." Grace studied him, her eyes searching for sincerity. She saw no pity, no patronizing intent, only a man who seemed genuinely humbled and remorseful. Still, her trust had been shattered too many times before, and she couldn't ignore the scars those experiences had left. "I don't know, William," she said honestly. "I've had to fight so hard to protect Lucy, to hold on to what little we have. I can't afford to let anyone else hurt us." William nodded, his expression resolute. "I understand, and I won't ask you to trust me right away. All I can do is show you that I mean what I say." He knelt to Lucy's level, his gaze softening as he smiled at her. "Hi, Lucy," he said gently. "Do you remember me?" Lucy giggled and reached for him, her small hands clutching at his tie. The simple gesture brought an unexpected lump to William's throat. He looked up at Grace, his eyes shining with unspoken emotion. "She deserves a home, Grace," he said quietly. "And so do you. Let me help you build one. Not as a debt to repay, but because because I care." Grace's heart wavered. She had spent so long guarding herself, keeping others at arm's length to protect Lucy. But in William's eyes, she saw no judgment, no agenda, only sincerity. Lucy's innocent laughter filled the room, a sound that seemed to chase away the shadows of doubt. "All right," Grace said finally, her voice trembling. "But this has to be real. William, no pretense, no fear, no conditions." William nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I promise." In the weeks that followed, Grace and Lucy moved into the mansion, not as guests, but as part of a growing family. The house, once cold and impersonal, transformed into a home filled with warmth and laughter. Grace found a renewed sense of purpose, accepting a position in William's company that allowed her to rebuild her career and contribute to their shared future. Lucy, thriving in the security of their new life, brought endless joy to both of them. One sunny afternoon, as they played in the garden, Lucy tugged at William's hand and called him Daddy for the first time. The word hit him like a wave, filling a void he hadn't realized existed. In that moment, he knew his life had been irrevocably changed for the better. Grace watched them from the porch, her heart full. For the first time in years, she felt at peace, not just because of the security they had found, but because of the love and trust that had grown between them. Together, they were no longer just surviving. They were building a life filled with hope, joy, and a future worth fighting for. And so, in the warmth of a home filled with love, William, Grace, and Lucy began a new chapter, one defined not by wealth or status, but by the simple, profound connections that made life truly meaningful. Thank you for watching this story of resilience, redemption, and the transformative power of human connection. If William and Grace's journey touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Empathy Stories for more inspirational tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how this story resonated with you. Until next time, remember, even the smallest act of kindness can create ripples of hope.